He was the kind of man who believed power could buy respect. A CEO everyone feared, but no one truly knew. One morning, in front of his entire staff, he pointed at the cleaner and shouted, "You're fired." And the next second, the cleaner collapsed right in front of him. That single moment shattered everything he thought he understood about life, success, and humanity. Because sometimes it takes one fall to learn how to rise again. The morning light spilled through the glass walls of Silverline Towers, streaking across polished marble and echoing in the quiet hum of air conditioning. The city outside was alive, horns chatter and the distant song of street vendors. But inside, everything felt cold, symmetrical, and silent. The CEO, Rav Malik, stood by his corner window, his reflection caught between glass and sky, his tailored suit fit like armor. His voice, when he finally spoke, carried the weight of a man who hadn't slept peacefully in years. "Send him in." His assistant's heels clicked away, and a few seconds later, the office door creaked open. A man entered, older, clothes simple, shoes worn. Rafiq, the building's cleaner, held his cap in his hands, his eyes avoiding the marble floor as if afraid of dirtying it with a glance. Arav didn't look at him at first. He was busy scanning a report, numbers bleeding red, losses, errors, delays. But his anger wasn't about numbers. Not really. "Do you know?" Arav's voice cut through the stillness. "What happens when people don't do their jobs properly here?" Rafiq swallowed. "Sir, if this is about the..." Arav slammed the file shut. "Answer me." The cleaner flinched. They get replaced, sir." "That's right." Arav said, his tone sharp as glass. "Replaced. Because this company runs on precision. One mistake spreads like rot." Rafiq's trembling hand tightened around his cap. "Sir, I didn't mean to. The elevator, it jammed while I was still cleaning. I told your assistant. I don't pay for excuses." Arav's eyes lifted, cold and exact. "You're fired." The words echoed in the vast room like the crack of thunder. Rafiq stood frozen, then gave a slow nod, the kind that carried years of silent humiliation, and turned to leave. But before he could take a step, his knees buckled. The cap fell. His hand reached for the wall that wasn't there then. Silence. The man collapsed. The thud broke through Arav's fury like a blade through fog. For a moment, he didn't move. His jaw clenched, his breath shallow. Then something, guilt, fear, memory, jolted him. He rushed forward, kneeling beside the cleaner. Hey, Rafiq!" His voice cracked, stripped of authority. "Call an ambulance, now." His assistant burst in, gasped, and hurried out again, shouting into her phone. Arav pressed his fingers to the man's neck. The pulse was faint, but there. Sweat glistened on Rafiq's forehead, his lips pale. Arav's mind blurred. Board meetings, deadlines, everything dissolved, leaving only this fragile, unconscious man who just lost his job. He had shouted the words, "You're fired," with so much venom, but now, faced with Rafiq's stillness, he couldn't breathe. Outside the window, sunlight flared too bright, too merciless. At the hospital, the antiseptic air clung to Arav's throat. Machines beeped softly in the background. Rafiq lay pale and still, a drip running into his arm. A doctor spoke in calm, efficient tones. Severe dehydration and exhaustion. His blood pressure dropped dangerously low. He hasn't been eating properly, it seems. Arav stood by the bed, silent. The doctor's words felt like needles. "He's lucky someone brought him here in time," the doctor added, glancing briefly at Arav before walking away. Arav sank into the plastic chair beside the bed. He wasn't used to waiting. But there he sat, motionless, his tie loosened, his expression unreadable. He watched the cleaner's chest rise and fall slowly. In that rhythm, something inside him cracked, a memory he'd long buried. A dusty street. A small boy standing beside a cart. His father, thin, tired, coughing, but still smiling. "Work with honesty, son," his father had said, "even if no one notices." The same father who had collapsed one day from exhaustion in a factory that never called an ambulance. Arav pressed his palms against his face. He hadn't thought of that man in years. The shame of poverty, the hunger, the slow climb out of it. He had buried all of it beneath success. But now the past stood before him, wearing a cleaner's uniform and lying in a hospital bed. The door opened quietly. A young woman stepped in, clutching a small paper bag. Her eyes, wary but kind, darted between the machines and the sleeping man. She was Rafiq's daughter, Amina. Arav stood as she approached, unsure what to say. She looked at him, suspicion flickering behind her politeness. "You're the one who brought him." "Wes," he said softly. "He collapsed in my office." She gave a small nod, placing the bag on the bedside table. Her voice trembled as she whispered to her father, "Baba, I brought your medicine. Please wake up soon." Arav watched her, the way her fingers brushed her father's hand, the quiet strength in her posture. There was something painfully steady about her, like someone who had learned to live with disappointment but never stopped hoping. He found himself saying, "He'll be okay. The doctor said he just needs rest." She didn't look at him. Rest doesn't pay bills, sir. The words stung. For the first time in years, Arav didn't know how to respond. He was a man whose words could move markets, silence rooms, but faced with this young woman's quiet truth, he had nothing. So he just stood there, watching as the sun dipped below the hospital blinds, painting the walls gold and soft. Rafiq's breathing steadied, and in that dim light, Arav felt the weight of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Regret. Not the sharp regret of a bad deal or lost profit, but the slow, human kind, the kind that stays. And for the first time, the mighty CEO whispered under his breath, almost as if confessing to himself, "I'm sorry." The night outside deepened, and inside that small hospital room, something fragile began to shift, quietly, like the first flicker of dawn after a long storm. Morning arrived softly, the kind of pale, gentle light that makes the world seem half asleep. The hospital ward smelled faintly of detergent and distant rain. Machines beeped, nurses moved in hushed rhythms, and in one quiet corner, Rafiq stirred. Arav sat nearby, still in the same clothes as last night. His jacket hung over the chair, his sleeves were rolled up. The CEO, who once commanded boardrooms, now looked strangely small beside an old cleaner's hospital bed. When Rafiq's eyelids fluttered open, confusion clouded his eyes. Then came recognition. "Sir," his voice cracked, frail and uncertain. Why am I here?" "You collapsed," Arav said quietly. "At the office. The doctor says you were overworked." Rafiq tried to sit up, grimaced, then leaned back ashamed. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to cause trouble. I'll be fine in a day or two. Please don't report me." Arav blinked. Those words hit deeper than they should have. "Don't report me." It was the plea of a man used to punishment. "You're not in trouble," he said after a moment. "Just rest." The older man tried to smile. "Thank you, sir. Allah bless you." From the doorway, Amina watched silently. She'd arrived earlier, bringing breakfast for her father, boiled eggs, dry bread, and a small cup of tea. Her gaze lingered on Arav's tired posture, the faint redness in his eyes. When Arav noticed her, he stood awkwardly, clearing his throat. "Good morning. He's awake now." She nodded. "I see that. Thank you for staying." There was something cautious in her tone, gratitude mixed with resentment. Arav couldn't blame her. He reached into his coat and placed an envelope on the small metal table. "For his hospital expenses, I'll have the company cover everything." Her brows furrowed. "You don't need to do that. We'll manage." He met her gaze. "You shouldn't have to." She hesitated. Then, with quiet strength, she pushed the envelope back toward him. "Money won't fix what broke him." The words landed heavy. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the faint ticking of the wall clock and Rafiq's slow, rhythmic breathing. Then she turned, softly brushing her father's forehead, and whispered, "He worked there for 14 years. Never missed a day. He was proud to clean those floors, said even marble deserved respect." Arav's throat tightened. "He's a good man," he murmured. She looked at him again, this time searching his face. "Then why did you yell at him like he wasn't one?" The honesty in her voice felt like a slap. He had no defense. Just silence and the growing weight of shame pressing against his ribs. Days passed. Rafiq began to recover slowly. And though Arav told himself he was only checking on a patient, he found himself returning each evening, always after office hours, always quietly. He would bring fruit, sometimes a flask of soup from the cafeteria. He didn't speak much. He would just sit, listening to Rafiq talk about his daughter, his late wife, or the years he spent sweeping marble floors that reflected the glow of other people's success. It was humbling and strangely grounding. One evening, Amina found him sitting near the window, staring at the rain streaking down the glass. The city lights blurred beyond it, like colors melting into one another. "Do you visit all your employees like this?" she asked gently. He smiled faintly.
Yeah.
"Just the ones who scare me." Her brow arched. "A father scares you?" "Not him," Arav said. "What he reminds me of." Her tone softened. "Your past," and Arav didn't answer immediately. His eyes stayed on the rain. "My father worked in a factory. Collapsed one night just like yours. I was too young to understand, but I still remember his hands. Calloused, always trembling. I promised myself I'd never live like that." He turned to her then. "And somewhere along the way, I became the kind of man who made others live like that." Amina didn't speak. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was heavy but honest. After a moment, she whispered, "At least you noticed." Over the next few days, a quiet rhythm formed. Amina would read the newspaper aloud to her father. Arav would sometimes join in. They would laugh at small things. The hospital tea, a nurse's scolding, the way Rafiq snored when he napped. They were three people from completely different worlds, yet for a few evenings, that hospital room felt almost like home. But reality was waiting outside. When Rafiq was discharged, Arav personally arranged transport for them. The old man insisted on thanking him before leaving. Sir, he said, holding Arav's hand with surprising strength, you've done more than I deserve. No, Arav replied, his voice rough. I did less than I should have. Amina watched silently as they spoke. When Arav turned to her, she gave a small nod, polite, distant. Goodbye, Mr. Malik. He wanted to say, take care. I'm sorry again. I'll make things right. But all that came out was a quiet goodbye. That night, the silence in his penthouse felt unbearable. The city shimmered beneath him, skyscrapers, lights, movement, but it all seemed hollow now. He wandered through his rooms. Glass, leather, chrome, everything polished and cold. He poured himself a drink, stared at it for a long while, then set it aside untouched. His phone buzzed. A notification from the company's HR department. Replacement cleaner hired for maintenance division. He stared at the message until it blurred. Then he opened a new email draft. HR department subject reinstatement, rehire Mr. Rafiq Khan. Full pay, transfer him to light duty work. Also include healthcare coverage for him and his family. He hesitated, then added one more line. And arrange a meeting with all department heads tomorrow. I have something to say. He hit send. Then he walked to the window and let the city lights reflect in his eyes. For the first time in years, Arav Malik didn't feel powerful. He felt human. And somewhere in that fragile feeling, a strange peace began to grow. Quiet but real. But in another part of the city, Amina was sitting beside her father in their small apartment, looking at the prescription bills and the half-empty pantry. Her father smiled faintly. Don't worry, Beta. I'll be back at work soon. She forced a smile back. Of course, Baba. Yet deep down, she knew the world didn't give second chances, at least not easily. Until the next morning, when a courier knocked on their door, holding an envelope with the Silverline Group logo. Amina opened it. Her eyes widened. Her father's name, his job title, reinstated, full salary, healthcare benefits included. At the bottom, a single signature, Arav Malik. Her father's eyes filled with tears. Hey, he did this. Amina didn't answer right away. She just stared at the letter, at the careful handwriting beneath the signature. For the first time, she wondered who Arav Malik really was. The man behind the title, the one who yelled, the one who stayed by a hospital bed, the one who signed this letter. And in that wondering, something unspoken began to stir. Not trust, not yet forgiveness, but the first faint spark of curiosity. The sun climbed lazily over the city, bathing the towers of glass and steel in a muted gold. Morning light brushed against the sign that read Silverline Group, as if trying to soften its corporate glare. Inside, the building pulsed with the rhythm of footsteps, ringing phones, and the faint hum of coffee machines. A world that never slowed down, not even for remorse. But that morning, something was different. Arav Malik stood in the boardroom, surrounded by executives who looked more like mannequins in their crisp suits and controlled expressions. His voice was steady, but his eyes, they held a quiet fire. I called you all here, he said, to make something clear. We've built this company on speed and precision, yes, but somewhere along the way, we've forgotten something essential, the people who keep it running. Murmurs rippled around the table. Someone shifted uncomfortably. Arav continued, tone sharper now. From today, every department will introduce a welfare review. Medical support for all workers, including maintenance staff. No one should collapse on our floors again because we didn't care enough to notice. The HR director cleared her throat. Sir, that could mean a considerable increase in humanity, Arav interrupted. His gaze hardened. I'll take that cost. The room fell silent. And in that silence, something inside him, the part that had been rusted by ambition, began to breathe again. That afternoon, the cleaners were gathered in the lobby. Rafiq stood among them, his cap neatly pressed, his eyes moist with disbelief. Arav approached, his usual commanding walk replaced with a quiet humility. When the workers clapped softly in gratitude, Arav raised his hand. Please, he said, you don't owe me thanks. I owe you an apology. Rafiq stepped forward, voice trembling. Sir, you already gave me more than I ever dreamed. Arav smiled faintly. Dream higher than, Mr. Rafiq. You deserve to. The older man nodded, blinking back tears. Then gently, Arav turned and walked toward the elevators, unaware that on the other side of the lobby Amina stood watching. She hadn't planned to be there. She had come to deliver some documents her father had forgotten. But now, seeing the scene, the CEO speaking softly to janitors, the same man who once shouted in rage, she felt something stir inside her chest. Not forgiveness yet, but understanding. Later that week, she got a call from the company. Miss Amina Khan. Yes, this is the HR office from Silverline. Mr. Malik recommended you for a part-time administrative position in our internal communications department. Would you be interested? She froze. But I'm not qualified for that. He believes you are. Said you have a clear voice and honest words. Amina didn't know what to say. She looked at her father, who was sipping tea by the window. His face brightened when he heard, "Take it, Beta. Maybe it's time our luck changed," as she smiled faintly, though a quiet fear fluttered beneath her ribs. Maybe. The first day she walked into Silverline as an employee, not just the cleaner's daughter, her heart drummed in her chest. The office smelled of coffee and ambition. She wore a plain beige kurta, her scarf neatly pinned, simple but dignified. People glanced at her curiously, some whispering. But Amina kept her chin high. Her job was small, managing employee bulletins, drafting short notices, helping organize internal events. Yet each day she found herself crossing paths with Arav. Sometimes in the hallway, sometimes in the cafeteria, sometimes just a brief exchange of glances in the elevator mirror. He always greeted her with quiet politeness. "Good morning, Miss Khan," she always replied with careful restraint. "Good morning, sir." But beneath those simple words, something unspoken flickered, something tender unfinished. One afternoon, as she was sorting documents near the boardroom, she heard Ray's voices inside. "This isn't how business works, Arav." One executive snapped. "You're turning us into a charity." Arav's reply was firm, low. "We're turning into a company that remembers people exist. That's different. You're risking profit for sentiment." A pause. Then, Arav said softly, "Maybe that's the first profit we've had in years." Silence followed. Amina froze by the door, her hand resting on a stack of papers. The tone of his voice, not angry, not arrogant, but wounded and resolute. She had heard that tone before. In her father, when he refused to stop working despite his pain. When Arav stepped out moments later and saw her standing there, he stopped. "Did you hear that?" he asked, almost embarrassed. She nodded. "Wes," he sighed. "They think I'm losing my mind." She gave a small, sincere smile. "Maybe you're just finding it again." That made him laugh quietly. It was a small laugh, almost shy, but real. And that moment, brief as it was, became the start of something neither of them could name yet. Days turned into weeks. Amina worked diligently, and word spread quickly. The new administrative assistant who treated everyone equally from receptionist to manager. She would listen to people, smile softly, always find the right words for even the smallest bulletin. Arav began to notice her beyond her story. Her steadiness, her calm, her quiet dignity. She was unlike anyone he'd met in his world of sharp edges. One evening, as the office emptied, he found her still at her desk, struggling with the printer. "It hates me," she muttered under her breath. "Printers hate everyone," he said, walking over with a faint grin. She looked up, surprised, then laughed. A sound so light, so unguarded, that it felt like a crack of sunlight in the dim office. He fixed the paper jam easily. "Dear, sometimes it's not about pressing harder, just knowing where it's stuck." She tilted her head. "Is that advice for machines or for people?" "Both, maybe." For a moment, they stood there, the hum of the printer filling the silence between them. Their eyes met, not with longing, not yet, but with something gentler. Trust. After that, their exchanges grew more natural. Small conversations about life, about purpose, about how cities forget their souls. Amina would share stories of her father, her neighborhood, her late mother who taught her to always leave a place cleaner than she found it, not just in dust, but in spirit. Arav listened, really listened, and slowly, something inside him shifted again. The emptiness that money never filled began to feel less vast. One evening, Amina found herself in his office delivering a report. Outside, the city glowed in the twilight, a sea of lights beneath an orange sky. Arav was standing by the window, hands in his pockets, looking out. "Do you ever stop working?" she asked softly. He smiled. "I don't know how. Maybe that's why you forget how to live." He turned toward her then, a gentle sadness in his eyes. "And what does living look like to you?" She thought for a moment. "It looks like my father smiling when the power comes back after an outage. Like a cup of tea that doesn't get cold before you finish it. Like forgiveness that doesn't need to be said out loud." The room went quiet. The sunset light touched her face. Soft, gold honest. Arav didn't speak. But in that silence, something inside him, the ache, the guilt, the loneliness, began to ease. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about results or reputation. He was just there listening to a woman who saw life in small miracles. Later, when she left, he stayed by the window long after the lights went out. The city shimmered below, alive and infinite. And in that stillness, a thought whispered through his mind. Perhaps some collapses don't destroy you. Perhaps they make room for something new to stand. Rain lashed against the windows of Silverline Towers, blurring the city into a wash of gray and silver. Inside the boardroom, tension simmered like a storm behind glass. Arav Malik stood at the head of the long table, his reflection fractured across polished marble. The air smelled faintly of paper, coffee, and fear. Corporate fear, the kind that hides behind polite words. Across from him sat the board members, 12 men and women in dark suits, expressions taut, We need to talk about the welfare program. One of them began, voice sharp. Expenses have tripled in 2 months. You're allocating bonuses to janitors while our shareholders demand cuts. Arav met his gaze calmly. And yet productivity is up. Attendance has improved. People feel seen. This isn't charity, Arav! Another snapped. It's business. You're letting sentiment cloud your judgment. Arav's tone didn't rise, but it deepened. Then maybe judgment needed a little cloud. Maybe we've spent too long worshipping numbers and forgot how to be human. A low murmur ran around the room. Someone scoffed under their breath. You've changed, said finally. And not in a good way. Arav looked out at the rain beyond the window. His reflection stared back, older, quieter, strangely at peace. He murmured, I suppose I have. He turned, gathering his files. A meeting adjourned. The room stayed silent as he left. Only the rain dared to speak. Downstairs, the atmosphere was different. The maintenance workers, receptionists, and assistants now smiled more often, their greetings warmer. The sterile building had begun to breathe again. Amina passed through the corridors with a stack of memos in her arms, her scarf fluttering slightly as the elevator doors opened. She looked up just as Arav stepped out. Shoulders tense. Rough day, she asked softly. He exhaled a half laugh, the kind that makes you question if kindness belongs in business. Maybe it's the only thing that does. He gave her a look. Tired but grateful. You really believe that? I have to, she said simply. If I don't, what's left? For a moment? Neither spoke. The rain drummed faintly against the glass walls, like a heartbeat trying to remind them both of something real. A few days later, a headline broke online. Silverline CEO accused of financial mismanagement. Board questions recent policies. Arav's phone exploded with calls, messages, and questions. Investors demanded explanations. Journalists camped outside the building. He sat alone in his office, staring at the glowing screen, his reflection pale in its light. The accusations were twisted. His new welfare programs had been framed as corruption, his donations to employees painted as self-serving. He leaned back, exhaustion heavy in his bones. For the first time in months, doubt crept in. Maybe they're right. Maybe I pushed too far. Maybe compassion doesn't belong here after all. The door creaked open. Amina stood there, holding a folder, her eyes flicked to the chaos on his screen. I saw the news, she said quietly. He forced a small smile. Apparently, I'm the villain now. You don't look like one. He looked up, meeting her gaze. They want me to step down. Will you? He hesitated. Maybe that's what this company needs, someone colder. Stronger. She walked closer, her footsteps soft. No, they've had enough of that. What they need is someone who feels. Arav looked at her, reeled at her steady eyes, the calm certainty in her voice. It grounded him more than any boardroom ever had. How do you stay so sure? He asked. Because I've seen what happens when people stop caring, she said. They stop being people. Her words sank deep, and in that moment, amidst headlines, rain, and 1,000 unspoken fears, something fragile but steady held him together. That evening, he didn't go home. He walked instead. Out of the building, through the rain, past streets that once symbolized victory but now only whispered of loneliness. He ended up in an old part of the city, narrow lanes, cracked sidewalks, the smell of cardamom tea and diesel smoke. He stopped outside a small tea stall, water dripping from his hair. The vendor looked up. You okay, bye? Arav smiled faintly. I think so. He sat on a wooden bench, sipping hot tea from a chipped cup, feeling the warmth seep into his cold fingers. Across the street, he saw a boy sweeping the pavement, humming softly. Something in that simple image, a worker, wet shoes, still humming, broke him open again. He realized then that maybe life wasn't about being admired. It was about being awake. The next morning, when he walked into Silverline, whispers followed him. Cameras waited in the lobby. The press statement from the board had gone public, CEO under review. Amina watched from the side of the hallway as he walked past. Calm, composed, eyes steady, he paused when he saw her. They're holding a vote tonight, he said, on whether to remove me. Do you want me to say something? She asked. He shook his head. You've said enough already. You reminded me who I am. She hesitated, then said softly, whatever happens tonight, you did something good, Arav. That doesn't disappear just because people don't see it. He nodded, something flickering in his eyes. Gratitude, maybe something more. That evening, the boardroom filled again. The storm outside hadn't stopped, lightning flashed, thunder rolled, and tension crackled like static. The vote was swift, numbers for removal. 4 against. It was over. Arav stood, shoulders square. Thank you, he said simply, for reminding me how easily truth bends when fear pays better. He left the room without looking back. When he stepped outside, the rain greeted him like an old friend. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashed, questions fired. But he didn't stop. He kept walking until the lights blurred, until his reflection vanished into the puddles. And then, through the blur of headlights and rain, he saw her. Amina, standing under a single umbrella, waiting at the edge of the street. "How did you know where I'd be?" he asked softly when he reached her. "I didn't," she said. "I just came where the rain fell hardest." He laughed quietly, a sound caught somewhere between sadness and relief. She lifted the umbrella higher, covering them both. "So what will you do now?" He looked out at the soaked city, its chaos shimmering like a broken mirror. "Maybe start again. Somewhere smaller. Somewhere real." She nodded. "Good." They stood there in silence, raindrops pattering on the umbrella like whispers. Two people, one who had lost his crown, the other who had never needed one, sharing a moment that felt oddly sacred. Arav glanced at her. "You know, when I first saw you in that hospital, I thought you hated me," she admitted. Then she smiled faintly. "Now I just worry about you." He smiled back, tired but genuine. For a brief, fleeting second, he reached for her hand, not to hold it, just to feel the warmth of someone real. And under the soft rain, surrounded by the noise of a city that didn't care, something pure and wordless passed between them, not love yet, but the kind of understanding that only broken people share. That night, as he walked her home, the world felt quieter. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Their silence spoke louder than words. When they reached her gate, she turned to him. "You're not defeated, Arav. You're just free now." He looked at her, rain dripping from his hair, eyes steady. "Maybe that's what defeat really means. Learning freedom the hard way." She smiled softly. "Maybe." He took a step back, looked at her one last time and said quietly, "Good night, Amina." "Good night, sir," but her voice trembled just slightly, enough to leave something unsaid hanging between them. As he walked away into the rain, Amina stood watching until he disappeared into the blur of headlights. Her heart ached, but not with sorrow, with a strange, gentle hope. Because sometimes, people have to lose everything before they can see what truly matters. 6 months passed. The city moved on, as it always did. Headlines faded, faces changed, offices found new kings to worship. Silver-lined towers still gleamed under the morning sun, but somewhere in its polished floors and spotless glass, a certain warmth had vanished again. And far away from that corporate skyline, in a quieter corner of the city, life had taken a different shape. Arav Malik woke before sunrise every day, not to check stock markets or board reports, but to open the small door of the Lighthouse Cafe. The cafe wasn't big. Just 6 tables, soft white walls, and shelves lined with books people had forgotten to return. The smell of coffee and rain lingered there like an old song. It stood near a children's hospital, where nurses and parents often came for tea. Arav would brew the coffee himself, sometimes badly, sometimes perfectly, and serve it with a quiet smile. He no longer wore suits, just a simple shirt, sleeves rolled, a faint trace of silver at his temples. His hands, once made for signing deals, had grown used to wiping tables and carrying trays. And yet, for the first time in years, he felt at peace. It had begun as an accident. After leaving Silverline, Arav disappeared for a while, traveling to smaller towns, volunteering at shelters, helping his old driver start a grocery business. Each act, no matter how small, felt like stitching a tear inside himself. Then one evening, while passing the hospital where Rafiq had once lain unconscious, he noticed a small, empty shop nearby, dusty, unloved, forgotten. Something about it called to him. He spent weeks cleaning it, painting it white, planting small pots by the window. When it opened, he named it the Lighthouse. Because, he told himself quietly, some of us need a little light to find our way back. One crisp morning, the bell over the cafe door chimed. He turned, cloth still in hand, and froze. It was Amina. She stood at the entrance, hair loosely tied back, a folder pressed to her chest. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. The soft smell of coffee mingled with the faint scent of rain on her scarf. "I wasn't sure you'd remember me," she said finally, with a small, teasing smile. He smiled back, slow, disbelieving. "I'd have to forget half my life to forget you." Her eyes softened. "I heard about the cafe. My father told me. He said he always knew you'd do something good with your second chance." "How is he?" "Better," she said, taking a seat. "He cleans part time now at a school nearby. Says it's peaceful. No marble floors to worry about." They both laughed softly, the kind of laugh that releases months of silence. He poured her coffee. Dark, rich, slightly imperfect. She sipped it, eyes thoughtful. "You've changed." "So have you," he said. "You're calmer." "I learned it from someone," she replied. He looked down, smiling. "And I'm guessing that someone once yelled, 'You're fired,' in a glass tower." Her laughter broke through the air, clear, warm, healing. "Yes," she said. "That one." As weeks went by, Amina began visiting the cafe more often. Sometimes before work, sometimes after. She now wrote short articles for a small online journal, pieces about dignity, labor, and the beauty of ordinary people. Arav would read them quietly after she left, his fingers tracing her byline as if it were something fragile. They never spoke of Silverline again, not directly. But in their silences, it was there, like a scar both of them had stopped hiding. One evening, the cafe was almost empty. The sun dipped behind the hospital across the street, turning the windows gold. Arav was closing up when Amina lingered by the counter. "I want to tell you something," she said, her voice low. He leaned forward. "I'm listening." "I got an offer," she said. "A publication in London wants me to write full-time. It's a good opportunity." His hands stilled. He forced a smile. "That's wonderful." She studied his face. "You don't sound happy." "I am," he said softly. "I just didn't realize how much this little cafe will miss you." A pause. Then she smiled sadly. "It's strange, isn't it, how people enter your life like storms and leave like sunsets, quietly, beautifully." He looked at her for a long moment. "And sometimes," he said, "they stay, even when they leave." Their eyes met, long enough for words to become unnecessary. A week later, she returned one last time. It was raining again, the kind of rain that made the world blur and shimmer. The cafe was warm, the windows fogged. Arav was cleaning tables when she walked in, holding a small brown envelope. "I wanted to give you this," she said, placing it on the counter. Inside was a short article. "The man who fired, then saved." He read the first few lines. "They say redemption doesn't make noise. It walks quietly through small acts. A hand offered, a wound tended, a heart learning to beat differently. He once stood above the world and fell. But in the fall, he found the ground again, and from there, he built something real." When he looked up, her eyes glistened. "It's about you. But it's really about what you taught me. That forgiveness is just another name for courage." His voice caught. "You shouldn't have written this for me." "I didn't," she said softly. "I wrote it for anyone who's ever been broken enough to start over." He stepped closer. The world outside disappeared. Only the rain in her voice remained. "Thank you," he whispered, "for seeing the man I forgot I could be." She smiled, that gentle, knowing smile. "Thank you for becoming him." They stood there in the golden lamplight, words dissolving into something larger: gratitude, tenderness, peace. Then, after a quiet moment, Amina said, "My flight's tomorrow." He nodded slowly. "Then this isn't goodbye." "No," she said. "It's just another beginning." When she left, he watched from the doorway as her figure disappeared into the rain. And though the cafe felt emptier, it wasn't lonely, because everything she had awakened in him, kindness, humility, warmth, still lingered in the walls, the air, the scent of coffee that drifted into the night. Months later, the Lighthouse Cafe had become a quiet refuge. Nurses, workers, children, they all came, drawn by the peace in that place. On one of the shelves beside the register lay a framed clipping of Amina's article. Below it, in neat handwriting, a quote Arav had written, "Because love doesn't always arrive perfect, it arrives brave." He would sometimes look at it when the sun poured through the windows, warming the tables. Every time he smiled, not with regret, but with a kind of gratitude that comes only after falling, breaking, and healing. Outside, life went on. Inside, peace stayed, and the man who once shouted, "You're fired," now greeted each morning with quieter words, "Welcome."